So we know the climate crisis is real, in spite of some people who would call it a hoax. And we know there's so much good that we can do, so much work that we are prepared to do. So let's get involved. Let's stay in touch. Please, if you are interested in doing more work, text climate at 30330. See you out there.
Hi, I'm Ana Marie Cox. This is 90 Days with Ana Marie Cox. It's a countdown to the election, which is just 38 days away. That's less than 1,000 hours. Then all of our troubles will be gone, or they'll be worse, or they'll just be the same. But on this show, we talk to smart people about what they're thinking, noticing, obsessing about within this wild, historic, unprecedented election. And the smart person I'm talking to today is Akilah Hughes. She is the host of a brand new podcast, Rebel Spirit, which is about her quest to unseat her high school's mascot, the Confederate General, and to replace him with a biscuit, which
Yes.
who would not want to rally around a biscuit? She's also the author of Obviously Stories from My Timeline, and a person that I knew in my work life.
Yes.
From a couple generations ago.
Yeah.
a couple iterations of my resume. She was the co-host of What a Day when I was also at Crooked Media. So
Yeah.
Akilah, hey.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me, Anna. This is a great day.
It is a great day. I feel like obviously we could catch up just personally a lot.
Yes.
But the show is about politics, which would come up.
Mhm.
And so I have to ask, so what's on your radar? What are you thinking about, concerned about, think people should be talking about?
Yeah, regarding the election.
We're in the election. Politics.
Politics generally. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that, I think if I start from a much more zoomed out place, I feel really positive because I do think that we are in a moment of corruption being rooted out in many offices of government across the country. And so that feels good and right, no matter what side of the political spectrum you are on. I personally feel that, like, the grossness with Mark Robinson in North Carolina is a real gift to the Democratic Party. I think that he is just, a clown car sort of character, and to see this all come out, right before the mail-in ballots are sent out for the election there is stunning and wonderful, and he's not dropping out. We'll probably talk more about this, but obviously Eric Adams he wasn't running for office, but him being sort of outed as potentially committing several federal crimes feels in ways triumphant. And I also think, it's unfortunate that we're not getting more of Trump in the judicial system before the election. But I do think that him facing those 34 felonies and us all being aware of it is something that needed to happen regardless. And so that I still feel a slight warm glow about that era. But the reality is, we have 38 days. And so it's very stressful. I think, in addition to this being a sort of historic election for many reasons, we have people who are trying to implant themselves as dictators versus the sitting vice president. This is also, I would say, the most online election so far. And that might just be a natural progression, but it also, I think, it has to do with the fact that we were all at home and on Zoom, and we all got used to being on our computers so much. Like, I think it's just the learning curve is now complete, and we are all, unfortunately, terminally online. And so that has made everything so heightened that this is a very stressful election. When maybe it wouldn't have been if this was like 2008 or 2012.
One thing I agree with all of those things that we could be talking about, or agree those are things we could be talking about. And I feel similarly to you, but just to pick up on the online thing, those of us who consider ourselves extremely online are aware of that. I think one thing that's happened is that it's not such a big difference than a normie anymore.
Yeah.
Like, there was a time that to be extremely online was to really have your brain completely pickled in a specific way
Yeah.
that was very different from the general population.
Yeah.
To be knowledgeable about memes that had not
Yes.
worked their way into the bloodstream
Right.
of normal Americans, that I feel like that's changed.
Yeah.
That, young people, and I'm gesturing to you because you seem
Thanks.
young to me,
Thank you.
who have grown up online and for whom memes are like a native tongue.
Yeah.
It's just like, I mean, the feral 25-year-olds running the Kamala,
Yeah.
like social media stuff
Totally.
are nailing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they
And
had the benefit of watching millennials get it right, and then they were like, "Okay, we're gonna put our spin on it." I also think that like it is much cooler to be chronically online. Like, I think people like to poo-poo it, like outwardly, but the reality is the moment that, Charlie XCX says Kamala is Brett, everybody and their mother who doesn't understand the album and all of the memes that went along with it started, feverishly Googling. And it did give, I think, Kamala this leg up because Trump, of course, is the oldest candidate now, like we all know. But how much older does he seem when you have 25-year-olds running the digital campaign for Kamala Harris?
except also he's terminally online.
Right, right.
Like,
He has almost like the boomer version of that, where it's like
yeah.
I always kind of like the corroded memes, where it's like clearly people have just screen grabbed them so many times that they're like 1 pixel and the huge white text. Those exist. Those are still popular with a demographic. It's just a less sophisticated version of the brat summer.
So I could talk about just how terrible Trump is and mocking him and the joy that there is to be had in that, and that the 25-year-olds have brought us. But I do want to mention Hurricane Helene.
Mm-hmm.
When we were talking before we officially started the show, I think I said something like, it's the worst climate disaster and then it's just like, it's
This
just
week.
yeah.
Today.
And that crosses over into what you're saying about being terminally, well, what we were talking about with the young people being online. Like, I think it's possible to feel the effects of that in terms of, and like emotionally, in a much wider range. It's not just happening in the Southeast.
Right. I think that that's fair. I mean, I live in California, and we have our fire seasons have gotten worse and worse over the years. I mean, this year so far, it's been, I mean, I think there's one that's still considered the worst of all time, but it hasn't turned the sky orange. So to me, that's a win. I don't know if you all remember the orange sky, and it's feeling like your bones were dissolving because the air was smoke. But, you know, that's I think if that's the litmus test for how bad things can get here, it happens every year now. And I think that, especially for young voters, to bring it back just to politics, that it is a top of mind concern. Like, I think that a lot of people are like, oh, it's just hot. Oh, it's just like, I'm like, no, these kids, they were born back when it was like, climate change might be an issue. And every year since, it has gotten worse. We have these mega hurricanes that are just coming through and destroying, cities, mega tornadoes. We have hurricane. I mean, last year we had a tropical storm in the West Coast, which is like unheard of. So there is this, I mean, there's a huge urgency to do something about it. And I also think that like part of the reason that a lot of young people are so dejected already and so turned off by politics is that they're looking at a long term because they have to, right? They're young. They have a much longer life ahead of them, ideally. And they're like, well, none of these leaders are actually going to address this in a meaningful way. And I think that that falls on both sides of, the what our political spectrum is in America, frankly, of, Kamala Harris saying she's into fracking, which is like crazy. But then you also have Donald Trump who's like, It snowed, so there's no climate change, right? Like, it's not hot. It's like we are living in a time where I think the cognitive dissonance of like we're all living in the same planet where things are not going well. Like the climate is bad. The climate is only getting worse. Um, and politicians who kind of just sidestep really any action that we can like see to reverse any of this or at least slow it. Um, it's just scary.
Yeah. I was thinking about fear this morning. As one does.
You weren't feeling fear, but you were thinking about it.
Well, I was feeling it and then thinking about it, which is fun for me to think about it. It makes it feel a little less. But so I was really, when actually I was at Crooked, I did a season of my show on conversion experiences. And one of the most fascinating things I learned was it is really hard to brute force a conversion experience, right? Like you cannot make someone feel differently about something. Maybe you've had this experience with your podcast. I am guessing.
yes. It's a good guess.
Because one of the things that happens is our brain is trained to recognize a threat and then to just keep recognizing it. I mean, you can respect that as an evolutionary adaptation, right? Like it is better to believe that the threat is there than to stop believing the threat is there. So once you believe something, your brain is like, gotta keep believing it, gotta keep believing it. And when you present someone with contrary evidence, it evokes the amygdala, the fear response, right? And I was thinking about Trump voters and why it's so hard to dissuade them. And there's whole papers being written about that. But what they're scared of and how scared they are of like wokeness, right?
The amorphous blob that is being woke.
Or getting canceled.
Right.
Or, losing, in what amounts to kind of losing their place in the universe, kind of. And how it's, I'm struggling to articulate this. I swear I was thinking about it. That part of the problem or the things that you want to do is to get them scared of something else. That sounds really weird.
No, but I think that's right. They always say like the thing that will shake you out of trauma is a worse trauma. So it's like, like what could be worse than wokeness for them? Imminent death, but they're not going to think about that. They're not going to think about that.
It's like easier to be scared of losing your centrality in our cultural conversation and having the world revolve around you. That is like an easier thing to be scared of. I don't easier. I'm having trouble. I feel like, okay, you go. Like, you know what I'm talking about? You had the experience with the podcast. Like what's...
Yeah. I mean, a real thread in the podcast has been this idea of change versus tradition. And I think tradition for a lot of people is based in fear, but they don't recognize it that way. They see it as like, no, it's right because we've always done it this way. And it's like, well, have you ever questioned why we do it that way? And is it possible there's another way to do things? Is it possible that this future that you're so scared of might actually benefit you in some way? You might even be more involved in the conversation because the conversations might be more honest. And I think that, when we talk about that fear, what I found doing my podcast, and it is about like talking to people in the South who are very married to Mr. Rebel, a Confederate general who's been there since the 50s. And coming up with lies to back up why he's there. He was clearly a response to Brown versus Board of Education, but for them, they're like, rebel without a cause. It came out a year after we decided. And so that's why. And it's this flailing effort to just hold on. And it's not because they love the tradition so much, because they got rid of the physical mascot in 2017 when they were getting rid of all of these Confederate icons. And the timing couldn't have been worse for the area. I don't know if you remember. I think you remember Charlottesville with the khakis and the torches. You were like, what's she going to say? I think we all have that burned into our minds forever. Well, you'll remember Heather Heyer got ran over by a car in that riot. And that was sort of like this powder keg moment for America. The guy who ran her over with a car is from where I'm from. And so there were suddenly tons of eyeballs on the area. And instead of that being a moment to say, let's leave this Confederate crap behind, they doubled down and said, why would you take our statues? Why would you take our heritage? This is who we are. And so what that revealed is that it's more about this fear of what is coming, not like this love of what is there, because they got rid of Mr. Rebel and it's not like they're still clamoring to get him back. The kids have no mascot, so everyone under the age of like 50 doesn't give a shit about the rebels, what that means. It means nothing to them. The school has not been able to secure the rights to Star Wars, so it's not that. The rebels still means Confederacy, and I think that like it is this really sad. It's a sad moment when you have a young generation that just wants anything to rally around, and you have older individuals saying, we'd rather you have nothing than have something besides this hateful crap. And I think that, if a lot of these people were honest, it is just like a lack of education about what's possible. It is a fear that they will be treated the way that they have treated other people in the past. And I'm pretty sure no one's suggesting replacing that mascot with like, I don't know. I don't even know what would be an equivalent black.
I'm sorry. Like,
You're
I mean, you're being very, very generous in framing it that way. Official white person right here. I don't think one of the whitest
There isn't
people,
a thing, right?
seriously. Look, I'm like glowing, but I don't think there is a thing. I don't.
Yeah.
Like it,
right.
Unless you like Darth Vader. I mean, to bring up the Star, if you made Darth Vader was a pretty equal opportunity, ironically voiced by James Earl Jones.
Yeah,
hero,
exactly. Right.
But
amazing.
Equal opportunity oppressor. Sure.
Exactly. And nobody's even in right. And that's the wild thing. It's like, even then the black kids would still be oppressed. So like whatever the worst idea is better than this. And they're just like, please. Like, and these are, I mean, when I say older, these are like 80-year-old individuals who are like, my last wish is that we never get rid of the Confederate imagery and iconography in the school. Like,
and sorry, I'll let you talk, but I also want to point out Confederates lost. Confederates lost.
Yes, like, major losers, famously losers.
Whenever that comes up, like also like with Mark Robinson saying he wants to be a black Nazi, bad, but
losers.
Also they lost.
Right. I'm like, what's so funny? In one of the episodes, and this isn't much of a spoiler because we have it in the trailer, but I speak with this guy, Tyrus. He used to be a wrestler. He's now like a contributor on Fox News.
I know who he is, yeah.
Right. And so I did not expect us to have any common ground because I am lefty left and he is not at all. And he went to a school that had the rebels as a mascot when he was growing up. And he made that exact point. He was like, why would we want to be on the losing team? Like, they took the L. Well, I don't get what is there to celebrate. And like when we lose, we are reminded of it every time.
All right, I'm going to very smoothly segue to national politics.
Let's do it.
Very smooth here.
Yes.
Because I do think that there's a parallel here about the losers.
Yeah.
The Trump voters clinging on to old definitions of things that we have clearly moved on as a culture, right?
Totally.
I mean, part of the problem is that, and I think they know this, the leadership, they're a minority party ultimately.
Yeah.
Like the majority, if everyone voted who could vote in the US, we would have far more progressive politics and it would be 100%. A Democratic majority by like a lot.
Yeah.
And so I think on some level they know they've lost.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, despite their best efforts, there is diversity in their country. And I mean, like, even just to like make it incredibly literal, a lot of these old white people have black grandkids. Like, let's be clear. So for them, it's like, I can love my grandkids and hate that the direction of the country is going in their way. And I think that it is the scarcity politic where it is like, if you get something, then that means someone's losing something. And I'm like, are we not the richest nation? Because you say that a lot. Are we not the most prosperous nation? Because if we are, I think we can handle some kids getting free lunch. And like, these are the kinds of issues that they want to die on the hill of, of like, kids don't deserve to eat.
Tampons.
Right, tampons. If they migrate their way to the boys' restroom, which like no one proposed, but let's say they did, who cares? Who cares?
Yeah.
Is he gonna die? Is he gonna cry because he saw a tampon? Does he not have a sister or a mom? Like, what is this like I mean, everything is scary to them. And after a certain point, it's like when you have, I have a nephew who I love so deeply, but his mom would have described him as a fearful child. It's like eventually when you have a fearful child, you got to force that kid to experience life to get over some of this. Because otherwise, it's like you get stuck there, there is no progress. And, I think it becomes like a real issue. And we are at the point where it's now a real issue, where it's like, you got to get over it. You got to grow up.
It's funny you bring up experience, and again, this sort of parallel that I know is what your podcast is really about.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
changing the mascot as a very small example of the kinds of changes that we could be having on a national level, and uh, it can leading someone or connecting with someone in a way that they change their minds about something. As we said, you can't do it with brute force.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to be hitting people, by the way. That doesn't work either.
Yeah,
but,
exactly. Unfortunately.
can't. I just mean idea
Mhm.
versus idea. That's what I
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah, rock in a hard place.
Yeah. What I've read about is that, and I bet this is something that's come up, is it has to be an experiential change.
Yes.
Like you have
100%.
to kind of lead them into something that is
Yes.
different than their current experience.
Yes. Yes. And I think that to bring it to that sort of broader political national energy, I think that is what Kamala represents for a lot of people, where, right, we had this, Joe Biden, for all of the great that he's done, is also like an old white man whose politics were right. And also plenty that I disagree with, let's be clear. But I think that since the Obama era, we haven't had someone young running for office who can sort of show that joy is an option, that you can look to the future without despair. And I think that that's been the only thing that has been, in all of the interviews, and I've interviewed 100 people for this podcast. And we spoke with people who changed their team names, right? And we've spoken to people on every part of that decision. And the conversation almost always comes back to they didn't know what it was. They didn't know what it would be like. And that was the fear. And essentially, it took pushing them off of the cliff for their wings to spread and for them to be like, this is better. My favorite example is my hometown, Florence, Kentucky, has a minor league baseball team. And it came there in 2004. I was in high school, and nobody really related to it. It was just called the Florence Freedom. And this is after 9/11. So it's like freedom, sure. And where I'm from, a lot of people served in Iraq. So it's like, okay, freedom. Big, vague statement. The mascot is an eagle. Nothing about Florence in particular is I think freedom. And they had that mascot and team name for years. And we have this great water tower that says Florence Y'all. And it's if you know nothing about the town, if you've ever driven down 75, which is a huge highway, it goes from Michigan to Florida. So a lot of people road trip. You've seen it. It's enormous. And so I used to work at the mall that's right there. And we would have people come from England and be like, Florence, y'all, have you heard of this? We have merch that says it. It's this lore about this water tower. And so now the team is the Florence Y'alls, which is incredibly inclusive, as you can imagine. It's an international brand. It is a registered mascot, Y'all Star. He's legitimate now. And everything for the team, for the area, for the just businesses in the area, for just so many different issues have been relieved or improved because they just got rid of this thing that they thought had. And I mean, this is a tradition from 2004, and they were dying on that hill.
Well, you know what's really sad to me is the idea that freedom could be considered a ideological concept,
right?
An ideological valence, right?
Exactly.
Because when you first said that, I thought of resistance to Confederacy. I thought of freeing the slaves, like that. I was like, wow, that's really radical. That a Southern team would be the freed slaves as a mascot.
Yep. No, that's the thing. I mean, and that's how I think, like, what a great metaphor for just our country's politics. That
Yeah.
freedom means something different on both sides of the spectrum anyway.
Yeah.
Like, for them, losing their
But
slaves
y'all
was
means
not
the same
freedom.
thing. But y'all means
That's right.
everything.
Exactly.
Although one of my favorite pens that I have, I'm from Texas, is y'all
Nice.
means all.
Yes. Yeah, that's one of their team slogans is, y'all means
Oh,
all. It's very cute.
nice. I was going to make another, gosh, I had a brilliant thing to say. Oh, maybe it was this, which is just speak to the idea that we've never really had young people or haven't yet had young people run for presidency to be examples of the positive change that can happen and the opportunity that comes with looking forward. The
Yeah.
youngest person we've had on the ballot in a long time is fucking JD Vance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who
That's a
is
good point.
closer to your
Absolutely.
age than mine.
Yeah,
He is
yeah.
very young. Like he
Mhm.
acts like an old person and has the views of an old person.
Yeah.
But like I think that's
No,
a
that's
scared
real.
human. I
I
really
think
think
that
he's
that's
a
a
scared
scare. I
human.
mean, I would say like repressed in many ways. Like I think that there has to be some level of just either selling out or like deep denial of the fact that he's married to an Indian woman. His kids are brown, and yet he is villainizing brown people in the state that he represents. I mean, that listen, if he doesn't win, I don't believe he's going to stay married. I'll say that because there are, Republican pundits saying that the White House is going to smell like curry if Kamala Harris gets there, and he's radio silent. So, I just think, I don't. I would say that, like, obviously, not all young people are progressive. And it is fascinating that he's not, because I will say that Appalachia, for all of the sort of stereotypes about it, I went to school in Appalachia at Berea College. We had an Appalachian Studies department. I, hiked over there. I'm very familiar with the people in the town and the culture. And like, as there are many things about them being rural people that makes them conservative, but they also are incredibly welcoming of gay people, and there are plenty of like gay Appalachians. And I think that this like I guess very narrow lens of what people can be and who they are is why JD Vance is losing. I mean, he's just not gaining anybody, even where he's from, because he doesn't represent most people. Like I think that the truth is, what's funny is like, I guess one of the oldest people running now. When you're using JD Vance as a young person, one of the older members is Tim Walz.
Yeah.
He's
Same age as
59.
Kamala. Got to stop you.
Right. So yeah,
He
same
is
age. Same
actually
age. They're both
almost
59.
but he is also dad in a way
Yes, he's
that
giving dad in a major way. And I think that more people relate to him because he is the kind of dad that's like not bothering everyone in the neighborhood. I have the friends who had great dads like that, who everyone was like, oh, I hope that he coaches like soccer, or like he's the one driving the, carpool. And then you have those dads who's in a fight with everybody, who's nitpicking everything, who you don't want to invite your friends over because he's going to say something racist or stupid or whatever. And I'm like, that feels like I think the US could really benefit from just a team of people who are saying, care a little less about what your neighbor's doing. If it doesn't concern you, get a life.
Yeah, I think the other thing that Tim Walz represents, and this just gets back to maybe young people's energy on on the side of Harris, is it's the representation of the joy that can be had if we are willing to experiment with ideas that right now, weirdly and only in the US, seem like on the far side of like the left radical end, and only in our country is this true. Is free lunch something that only radicals would accept? And this is true in almost every experiment in radical policy ideas, progressive radical ideas. Again, only here. When they're tried out, they tend to not just work in terms of policy, but also be incredibly popular, like UBI, like Housing First, like lunch programs, like
universal healthcare. Which is funny because I cannot believe that in 2024 Donald Trump is still running on getting rid of Obamacare, but it's like, actually everyone's getting healthcare, or at least most people, more people than had ever before, and no one wants to give it up. Shock, surprise.
I
I'd rather not have healthcare again. Like, who's dying on that hill?
The one thing I worry about is I feel like I want to do like an Instagram reel that's just like, okay, kids, this is what it was like when it was hard to get healthcare for pre-existing conditions. I want to tell you a story about the times that I couldn't get healthcare, right? Like part of my lived experience, like actually, I spent after I got sober, I spent like 10 years in Minnesota, and before ACA passed, and I could not get insurance except through Minnesota had something called MenCare, which was their high risk pool for people like me.
Damn.
Yeah. And it was
Like they
like
had to create a program because it was like, well, no one is insuring these people.
yeah. I mean, I came
That's
in with
messed
like,
up.
I came in as the person that I was with like chronic
A person who
illness,
needed help.
mental health, stuff. And
Yeah.
I wasn't going to be able to find insurance. And that's, oh God. I remember when
Right.
the ACA passed, like I remember, and I was
Yeah.
like, because I've been an independent contractor freelancer for
Yeah. I mean, yeah. It's like same. It is so hard.
yeah. I mean, the insurance kind of sucks sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. But I'm also like, even when you have great insurance, the insurance could just sucks. Like, even when I've had good insurance, I'm like, well, my doctor's not covering this, or my health insurance doesn't cover this, so I am paying $1,000 for medication, and that's not right. I think that generally healthcare sucks. And so it's like in what we are hoping for to bring it back to COVID is mitigation, not cure. Okay. We just have to mitigate bad healthcare. It's the best we can do.
Well, for now, although one of the things that I think like it's happened, with Harrison Walls coming on the ticket is this feeling like maybe we can push the edge and then move the Overton window on the left for once. Like I remember again, old enough to remember when Bernie Sanders looked like was a legitimate presidential candidate. That in of itself, I was like, what? Like, what is happening? It was very much like being a Cubs fan. Like is having the Cubs make a run but then eventually like they won the World Series. It was like I never expected this. My fandom was my fandom was just limited to just cheering. I never thought I was actually gonna have a chance.
Totally.
And so when he got that now, when he came so close, and then also when people like Elizabeth Warren started talking about these ideas like debt relief.
Yeah.
Like
right.
This feels like all possible with Harrison Walls.
Yeah, 100%. And I think too, like, this is why there is such a divide, because it seems extreme to be against relieving people of debt, especially when they are making the point that this isn't coming out of anybody's taxes. This money isn't real. Like, we can just say they don't owe the money anymore. We can just say that those companies don't have to exist because those companies are predatory. And for, a conservative, it has to be like doing some, gymnastics routine to keep making these sort of leaps to say that like this is somehow bad for the country. More people being able to afford to eat, more people being able to afford houses, houses becoming more affordable because we're going after predatory lenders. All of these sorts of things being their platform, it's almost like they're punching themselves in the dick, like just to be really crass.
Well,
like, why do you have to be more of a loser?
I have heard Republicans say, like, I have student debt, don't dare relieve it. Like, what? That is punching yourself in the dick. Like,
they have this like suffering. I mean, it's like, what is it? It's like the like in churches, they have that sort of like gospel of suffering where they're just like, yeah, like you should, like that's how you prove that you're a good human. And I'm like, I actually don't think so. I actually think we can choose not to suffer.
I know sometimes it takes people who has, let's say, just been through generations of oppression. To realize that suffering is not ennobling. Just saying.
Turns out it just sucks sometimes.
I just feel like that's an experience that a lot of people on the Republican side have not had.
Yeah, exactly.
And therefore think it's ennobling. They romanticize suffering.
Yeah.
Talk about like romanticizing rebellion, right? Like there is something romantic to rebellion, sure, but it sucks to be the class that has to rebel.
Right.
That's the thing that I think people
Exactly.
forget about the romance of rebellion, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Exactly.
we all want to be the Rebel Alliance in Star Wars.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Those were the good guys. You know why they rebelled? Because their lives sucked.
Exactly.
Like-
And it wasn't easy while they were rebelling. Like they're all sequestered to a small planet where they watch their home planet explode. Like it's bad for them.
Yeah,
So
I
I
don't
do
wanna-
think that like ideally we could all just get past it and be on the same team. But like, yeah, I do think that there is something about like Republicans looking for an oppression and looking for an oppressor, which is why it's so maddening that they're like these Haitians who had to like come here from being impoverished in a country that is impoverished because of the United States, um, and finding jobs and being good at them and being, lauded by the mayor as like bringing, industry to their town because they needed workers and people are moving away to now being like having acid thrown on their cars because JD Vance, who has, sure, he grew up in Appalachia, but he has
Okay,
Peter
wait.
Thiel's silver spoon.
He did not. He
That's
did
right.
not grow up in
That's
Appalachia.
right. He
Actually, we
visited
have to, like,
Appalachia. He visited
visit-
Appalachia. My bad. He visited a couple of times and decided to vilify his grandma. Because of that, he has to say, these newcomers, they're the real issue. And I just think that like he hasn't been oppressed. And it's
No.
like, and I think the biggest oppression he's facing is from MAGA Republicans who look at his wife and with a straight face say that they don't like immigrants, and they don't like people who are darker than a paper bag. And he just has to eat shit and be like, yeah, sure, I agree.
I've talked to him. I do have this weird like empathy for him, like distinguishing empathy and sympathy.
I just have to stop it right now. I don't have any empathy.
I mean, I just feel like, yeah, I was bullied as a kid too, JD. You know? Like,
Yeah, so-
I know I didn't turn out like you. Like,
Mhm.
that doesn't have to be the path that you go. I mean, talk
Right.
about, like, taking the Darth Vader path. Like,
Right.
I
right.
think that's the path that JD.
Yeah. Oh,
JD went
totally.
on. You know,
Totally.
like, the illusion of power did corrupt. I mean, I don't know. Like, obviously, like, I'm a science fiction fan, so like,
I love
we're
it. I love
we're
it.
definitely like speaking my language. Is there anything else you want to hit? Like, I know you lived in New York for a while, so you may
Yes.
have the Eric Adams news may have tickled you
Oh,
more
deeply,
than most.
deeply. Yeah, exactly. I think that like it's funny because there are only so many unifying events on Twitter, and this is a major one. I happened to be on my phone as I like to do, and when the news came through, it was like, well, I'm staying up late tonight, and I do feel like that is one benefit of being on the West Coast is that news broke kind of late. I think it's like 10 p.m. Eastern, and I'm like, hey, I'm just sitting down at 7 p.m. I got nothing but time for memes. And, I think it's just delicious that Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, the cop mayor of New York, who loves the police, who, has overfunded the police, and who has also tasked the police with shooting people for jumping turnstiles because they don't have $2.90 to ride a subway that hasn't really been updated since the 80s. I think that it's really just delicious. The guy who doesn't want any sort of bail reform for people who are stuck on Rikers Island for low-level crimes. I think it's delicious that he is going down for clearly several major, alleged crimes against the federal government. And the thing is, like, this is, a heavier way of putting it is treason. A lighter way of putting it is taking money from foreign agents to do their bidding with the power you wield as the mayor of the largest city in the country. And so I've been just loving it. But what I loved the most yesterday, because yesterday was the first full day of getting to experience it. We had a taste that night, but then we got to wake up to the front page.
The full course, the appetizer, the Eric Adams indictment appetizer.
Yes, it was delicious. Those potato skins were great.
Then what you had was his reaction to it,
Right?
Which was
his
meal.
little video.
I think that's where the meal comes in. Is
exactly
like what he did about it. Which
yes,
I mean,
not only did he put out that
Eric
video.
Adams.
But so having a press conference in the rain to protesters with bullhorns saying it's not a black thing, it's a you thing. And then just screaming resign repeatedly until he walks away. I can't wait to see that scene in the movie. That's all I'm saying.
It's not a Black thing, it's a you thing is so good.
It's so true.
It's
Because he was
so
surrounded
good.
by every Black person he could find. And everybody's like, don't bring us into it. You did that,
So
sir.
good.
Poignant.
I mean,
Poignant.
lots of good. I'm not on Twitter anymore. I'm on the Blue Sky. I encourage
Yeah.
everyone who's still on the
Same.
hate machine to come
I
to the
know. I gotta
non-hate
leave.
machine. It's good there. Akilah.
Yeah, here it's actually much better.
It's much
Do they
better.
have trending topics now?
Oh, they don't, but they just got video.
Okay, all right. It's getting there. It's getting there.
I like it. It reminds me of old Twitter, and it'll get some point where it's bad too. But for right now, it's really
right
good.
now. The Nazis haven't really invaded, so that's nice.
It hasn't become the Nazi bar yet, but there's been, I'm sure, good tweets that you could say, and I have seen good. They call them skeets, which I'm not okay with. But
yeah, I don't love it.
I'm
just gonna call it a tweet anywhere. Yeah,
I think that's
tweet wherever you post it.
I don't like Substack either, but yeah, fine, you have a Substack, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to Adams and quips about Eric Adams. Someone said, if you wanted to not get prosecuted for corruption, you should have stayed a cop. Which
that's facts. Beautiful. I saw someone say, I bet Eric Adams cares about the conditions at Rikers now, with that gif of the guy who was betting Michael Jordan, who's just like shrugging.
The other thing that is just a true fact, like I'm not even going to attribute to any one person, is that it's hard to be a prison abolitionist these days.
Yeah. Oh, that was my favorite. My favorite one was the person who was like, I'm still an abolitionist, but
I first felt that like when Trump got convicted. I was like, shit. Like,
right. Yeah. I'm like, I just think that if we are going to continue the system, then some people should have to experience.
Still don't like calling people felons. I really don't like calling people felons. Like,
right.
But also, I really wished in a debate, it could still happen, so they might have the second debate.
You think so?
Maybe in the vice presidential debate. This is what I want to happen. I want the JD Vance or Trump to be like, you all believe in letting felons vote, and then be like, deep in you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Turns out you love it. You love it, and you want them to. I believe in you
getting the right to vote. Donald, or to JD, like, I believe that the person that had your ticket should be enfranchised. So if you don't,
right, exactly that. Yeah, just say it now. Let it be known.
So is there anything else that you want to talk? Sorry, I'm sorry. What?
No, you're great. I mean, my final tweet that made me laugh a lot, and I wish I could. Well, you know what? I tweeted it. So I can't attribute it to me, though. I would have to attribute it to Justin Timberlake. But my favorite response is, this is going to ruin the tour. I just think, I believe that this is going to ruin the tour for Eric Adams, the world tour.
I didn't get in on that meme quick enough. Like, it hasn't become a part of my lexicon. But I think that actually this discussion is going to help it sink into me as one of the national inside jokes that we can all share. Akilah, I have missed you in my life.
I know, I miss you as well. This has been just like cathartic, because I think we both have the kind of brains that like to wander but connect in the end. Trump likes to think he can do this. He's not doing this. He's talking about toilets and sharks.
Are we doing the weaves?
Yeah, exactly. We are weaving, and you wouldn't believe the greatest weaves. And yet, but I feel like we've really covered a lot, and I wouldn't have wanted to talk about all of this with anyone but you.
All right. Thank you so much. Speaking of talking and having fun with weird things that shouldn't be fun, you have a new podcast.
Yes, Rebel
It
Spirit.
covers, the history of chattel slavery, but in a real fun way.
Yes.
It's called Rebel Spirit, which is about changing your high school mascot from the general.
Well, he's a Confederate general named Mr. Rebel. We want the team to go from the Rebels to the Biscuits. Is the easiest way to say it. Go Biscuits, go! Come on.
How would it have like a little assistant called Gravy?
Oh my God, I would love it. I would love it. Yes, I would love a little gravy sidekick, and I think the Biscuits name should be Butta da Biscuit. I think that it's like perfect. It's all right there. Cut, print. Let's just make it happen.
I'm really thinking about like the little like freshman who would be like, and I'm gravy.
Yes, exactly. At every game, throwing out biscuits to the fans. I love that.
All right. So also book, obviously, stories from my timeline. And thanks again for being here. Oh, right. This is my show. It's called 90 Days with Ana Marie Cox. Now, 38 days to the election, less than 1,000 hours. If you live in a conservative-ish state, you only have 8 more days to register. Please get registered to vote. Here in Texas, they have purged the voter rolls.
Yeah.
So check your registration. Even if you're registered, check your registration. This show is available as a podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, you should know that. If you're listening to it as a podcast, it's available on YouTube. And 38 days. 38 Next week, it'll be even less. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Quote, the White House will smell like curry.
Look, Kristen, I make a mean chicken curry. I don't think that it's insulting for anybody to talk about their dietary preferences or what they want to do in the White House. I think what Laura said about Kamala Harris is not what we should be focused on. We should be focused on the policy and on the issues.